Today I decided to give you guys a review of the Shrek franchise. This is a series of films that started when I was a kid, and are pretty much still ongoing to this very day. I very much enjoy this series, and it's basically more like a contemporary take on fairy tale stories. It was actually made by DreamWorks, and they didn't have much faith in it. They even sent animators who weren't the best to work on Shrek as like a punishment. But it turned out to be one of their biggest hits and launched one of their most successful franchises, if not the most successful franchise. I always love these movies. They're really funny. I also really love this set, the whole story set. What's great about the front is they're all facing the camera, and if you turn to the back, you can actually see that you see their backsides of the same image and see how they're standing on each other's shoulders and stuff. All in all, these are really fun films, and ones that I've actually rather enjoyed. There are a couple of duds in this franchise, but I don't think any of them are outright bad movies, but they're mostly pretty damn entertaining. And so without further ado, I'm going to give you guys my list from worst to best. Starting with Shrek the Third. Released in 2007, Shrek the Third is just, well, not a very good movie. It essentially shows Shrek, who is about to be king because the king died. I don't know why Fiona wouldn't take the crown, but maybe it's like a patriarchal kind of thing. I don't know. But he's about to be king, and he doesn't want to do it, so he has to go find Arthur, which is Fiona's cousin, so he can be king. Basically, the whole movie is about giving up your responsibilities and just pawning off on someone else. It's a weird message to send to kids, but I don't know. It's just not that funny. I feel this one's like the most lazy. Even the villain, Prince Charming, was already a villain in the second movie, more like a secondary villain, and they promote him to the main villain here. It's nice that they tied the movies together, but I just feel it's like the most laziest villain, the most laziest story, a weird message to send to kids about just giving up and trying to pawn your problems off onto someone else. I never did like this one. It's not terrible, it's not god-awful, but it's the most laziest of the franchise, and the most boring, too. I found myself just checking my watch several times while watching this film. Not a good movie, just the example of the series just hitting kind of a lull. But thankfully it did pick up again after this, but I don't really recommend Shrek the Third. Up next we have the original Puss in Boots. This one was actually okay, but I had problems with the story. Essentially, Puss in Boots is hanging out with Humpty Dumpty, who more or less becomes a villain in the movie, and along the way he, meets up with Kitty Softpaws, played by Selma Hayek, and she's an interesting character, and Puss in Boots has to basically prove himself. Jack and Jill is also in the movie, one of which is voiced by Billy Bob Thornton, and it's kind of weird because it seems like they're supposed to be like a couple, but if I'm not mistaken, aren't Jack and Jill supposed to be like brother and sister? I don't really want to get into like any sort of undertones there, but it just seems kind of weird. I don't know why that they're a couple in this movie, but Jack and Jill are more or less some of the bad guys. And this one was just kind of weird. Tonally, it's odd. The pacing is a bit weird. It's cool seeing Antonio Banderas play Puss in Boots again, and it's very entertaining in that right, but I think the story's a bit weak in this one. And while it's not god-awful, it's kind of a one-time watch. Up next is Shrek Forever After, the final chapter. This one is kind of a nice return to form, especially after Shrek 3. This one basically shows Shrek kind of fed up with fatherhood and being a husband, and he kind of misses the old days where he was an adventuring, rough and tough ogre. So he basically makes a deal with Rumpelstiltskin, who actually appeared in Shrek 3 as a completely different design, but we'll forget that mistake. And he basically loses one day of his life. Unfortunately, the day that Rumpelstiltskin took away was the day he was born. And so Shrek pretty much never existed. And it shows that the world is actually pretty terrible without Shrek. Well, so what Shrek must do is go on an adventure to try to stop Rumpelstiltskin, join up with a bunch of other ogres, including Fiona, and save the day. This one's actually pretty funny, and I did like this one. This is what Shrek 3 should have been. The villain's way more interesting. The story is pretty unique. I like seeing Fat Puss in Boots, which was hilarious. And then they got the warrior gingerbread man, and of course the warrior Fiona. It's actually pretty interesting. It's interesting to see what the world would be like without Shrek. And it shows that despite Shrek thinking that he doesn't matter, he actually does. It's basically, It's a Wonderful Life, more or less. They just took that plot but kind of repurposed it here. But that's okay, because that's a pretty interesting plot that's been done before in several movies, and it's done well here. All in all, I do like this one, and I think, like I said, a nice return to form. And I heard they might make another Shrek movie, but if they don't, this is a pretty good ending to the series, at least the main series, and the one that I actually do rather recommend. Up next, we have Shrek 2, Released in 2004, this is the continuation of the Shrek franchise, and one that I actually rather enjoy. This is actually a lot of people's most favorite, and I do understand that. This one's actually really fun. I love the story this time around. Basically shows Shrek going to meet his father-in-law. His father-in-law does not approve that he's an ogre and thought that a man would marry Fiona and turn her back into a human. And all sorts of shenanigans ensue, including the father hiring Puss in Boots to kill Shrek. This is the first appearance of Puss in Boots in the series, and he's magnificent here, played by Antonio Banderas. Basically, it's Zorro, which I can understand why they hadn't hired Antonio for that, but a cat. It's really enjoyable. The gags are great this time around. There's nothing not to love about this one. I adore Shrek 2, and I think it's a magnificent sequel. This is the best of the Shrek sequels, and I rather enjoy it very much. The Fairy Godmother's a great villain. There's great gags with Fiona and Shrek and Donkey. Donkey's great this time around. There's even a part where Shrek turns into a human and all the women are fawning over him. It's amazing. Really enjoyable, and one that I highly recommend. Coming in at number 2 is Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. This actually surprised the hell out of me and blew me away. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish I thought would just be kind of another generic sequel. It even came out years after the first film, so I just wasn't really expecting much with this one. But surprisingly enough, they really, really upped their game with the second one. And I'm glad that it took so long to make it. I know it's been over a decade between these two movies, but it was worth the wait. It has a new animation style that actually kind of resembles like a, more like watercolor kind of look, which I rather enjoyed. The villain this time around is Death, or at least a form of the Death. It's basically this wolf with these glowing red eyes, and that is pretty scary for a kid's movie. Even as an adult, I'm like, that guy's pretty damn creepy. And he was pretty great in the movie. The story is great, showing Puss in Boots basically trying to get another wish so he can wish for more lives because he's used up 8 of his 9 lives, which is just really cute. The setup is great. You see Goldilocks and the bears in this movie. They're kind of side villains. You also get this character named Jack, who's from like a nursery rhyme I'm not really sure about, but he's hilarious. And he basically has Jiminy Cricket with him, who basically tells him that he's a monster, which is just this great sequence. Everything about this sequel, I was incredibly blown away by. It's a great continuation of the Puss in Boots spin-off series, and a great continuation of the Shrek franchise. There's even a hint at the end of this movie that they might be going back to Far, Far Away to hang out with Shrek again, which maybe could lead to another movie. If they do have another movie, I kind of hope it's done in this style, because I actually rather enjoy this movie a lot. Very impressive, an amazing sequel that just blows the first one out the water. The first one is okay. The second one is great. And you don't see many franchises go from okay to great. I highly recommend The Last Wish, the best of the Puss in Boots movies, and my second favorite of the Shrek franchise. But none can beat the original 2001's Shrek. I remember seeing this movie in theaters as a kid and not knowing what the hell Shrek even was, but my mom saw commercials for this animated movie and she said, "You want to go to the movies?" And as a kid, I never turned down a chance to go to the movies. And so I said, "Yeah, sure, let's go see Shrek." It was me, my sister, my brother, and my mom. And I gotta say, it was one of the funniest animated movies I've ever seen, and it's still one of my favorite. The movie is essentially just a contemporary take on a fairy tale. One you've heard before. It is loosely based on the Shrek book, which I have read before, but this is actually a much more contemporary version of that. It's such a unique film because they take something that you already knew, which is fairy tales that, often have been done by Disney. And it gives you a unique take on that, and basically they act like modern day people with modern day jokes. And they did take a big risk with that. That could have dated the series. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of, like, pop culture references and stuff like that, but they actually work rather well. Like, Smash Mouth, who was a big band at the time, does the main song for this movie, but that song is not the Smash Mouth song. It's now the Shrek song. And this film takes everything about pop culture at the time and kind of tries to incorporate it into the movie. The film basically stars this ogre named Shrek, played by Mike Myers, who does an amazing job. Along the way, he meets a talking donkey, voiced by Eddie Murphy, and they get caught up in this adventure to try to save his swamp by rescuing the princess Fiona. And the whole time they're working for the evil Lord Farquaad, voiced by John Lithgow. Everyone in this movie is great. Cameron Diaz is amazing as Fiona. All the rest of the cast are great as well. And it's just a fun, contemporary look at fairy tale stories. And that's what's so great about it. It was even put into the National Library of Congress. And I think that, even though it's a kid's movie and kind of just an animated movie, I think it deserves that because it's such a unique film. I love and adore the original Shrek. And it's not most people's favorite. Most people probably would say Shrek 2 or Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, but for me, this movie just has a special place in my heart. I love the adventure. I love the action. I love the soundtrack. Hell, I even love the animation. It still looks great over 20 years later. I highly recommend Shrek. If you have kids or you just want to see a fun animated movie, you have to watch Shrek. Well, that's my list. I rather do enjoy this series a lot, and it's one of my favorite animated series of all time. I don't think it's quite as good as say, something like Toy Story, for example, but it's up there as one of the best animated series ever made. I adore the Shrek franchise, and I hope that we get more movies. I hope we get another Puss in Boots movie as well, but the second one didn't do great at the box office for various different reasons, but I do hope that this series continues in some form, and if there's whether it be a Puss in Boots 3 or a Shrek 5, I'm there. Thank you all for watching. This has been a fun video to make. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. If you want to, leave your list down below, and peace out.